Hi, I'm Madelyn Zorn, and today I'm going to be talking about Markus Zusak and the lasting legacy of his novel, The Book Thief. Before we can understand The Book Thief, however, we have to know something about the author, the time it was written in, and the time it was written about. So, Markus Zusak is the author of not only The Book Thief, but also I Am the Messenger, two cult classic literary YA novels. Born in Sydney, Australia in 1975, he's a fairly contemporary author and is still alive today. He has a double degree in English and History from the University of New South Wales, and his other accolades include his nomination for the Prince Award in 2003 before The Book Thief was even published. He also received the Margaret A. Edwards Award in 2014 for his overall lifetime contribution to young adult literature. He says that the inspiration for the book came from his parents' stories about their time growing up in Germany and Austria. Published in 2005, The Book Thief looks back to Nazi Germany. The book has received numerous awards, been on many best-of lists, won the Prince Honor Book Award, and was an American Library Association notable book. This book is not the first of its kind and actually grew out of a long-standing tradition of historical fiction in YA. One example of a precedent is Lois Lowry's Number the Stars, which also concerns itself with this same time period. The popularity and success of The Book Thief also spurred many new books about Nazi Germany, one of which is The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which actually works for a much younger reading audience than The Book Thief does. The World War II setting is extremely important. The book depicts accurately the German perspective of what it was like to grow up in a society that was highly pressurized and where children were forced into things such as Hitler's youth, which taught young children how to be good Nazis when they grew up. Other things that the book looks back to is the role of propaganda and how Hitler would manipulate the German citizens through books, writing, and speeches, and anything that conflicted with this ideology that was being passed around was often gathered together in the town square and burned. These book burnings are a central part of the novel. On the other side of that, it depicts the real German experiences of fear of bombings, food shortages, and the general lack of freedom of expression that Germans experienced. Even if they disagreed with Nazi politics, they probably felt constricted and unable to speak out. The greater threat that the book looks at is the threat to Jewish citizens of the concentration camps. Overall, the world depicted in The Book Thief is a world of fear. A brief plot overview, for those of you who may not have read it, is that the book follows Liesel, a young girl in Germany in 1939, who picks up a book at her brother's funeral. She shouldn't have this book, but she keeps it and hides it anyway. Her mother, who is a communist and may be sent away soon, sends Liesel to live with a foster family. She does this to keep her safe. The foster family are strangers at first, but they soon grow to love Liesel, and her foster father especially cares for her, teaching her to read in secret at night. This, of course, creates a love of literature in Liesel. She begins stealing books from the piles of burning books in the square, and also begins to help read and write her own stories when Max, a Jewish man that her foster family is helping to hide in their basement, befriends her as well. The literary significance of this novel is vast and is the reason that it continues to be important today. Not only is it historical fiction, but its variant has many unusual elements for YA books in general. It's much longer, it's 550 pages, and the style is poetic and sometimes even fractured. The literary elements of this novel include the narration, which is possibly the most important element. The book is narrated by a personification of death. This personification of death is a highly complicated character. Death is not seen as wholly good or wholly bad. Instead, he is seen as someone conflicted about what he must do to humanity, sympathetic towards them, but also a threat. A few quotes from Death include, "It kills me sometimes how people die." This shows his soft-heartedness for the people that he's rounding up. However, he also says, "You want to know what I truly look like? Find yourself a mirror." This shows that death is something that will happen to all of us, and that death is something that is a part of all of us. In this way, death is both a threat and a comfort. The book is also a coming-of-age tale, because by the time it ends, Liesl has grown up, and she has also experienced tragedy, which changes her and matures her. The fractured writing style reflects a tone of dissonance and makes the reader feel as disjointed and as under pressure as the people living in the time must have felt. This is an important symbol in the novel, and it's Max's short story, The Standover Man. What Max does is he takes a copy of Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's sort of manifesto memoir, and he paints over it with white paint in order to have paper to write and draw his own story. The symbolism of this is beautiful because on the one hand you have the resiliency of creativity and how human nature will always try to overcome and cover up, move on, make something better out of oppression. But then on the other hand, you have the words still underneath and bleeding through just a little bit. The book also works very well in that it's not just a depiction of a time in history. It contains universal themes that will always be relevant to readers. Some of these include family. For Liesl, the question of family is very complicated. She has multiple families. She has the biological family that she has lost and that has given her up. And then she also has a found family that she has to come to terms with. The importance of literacy and creative writing is also important, as well as the other side of that, the dangers of censorship and propaganda. At one point, Liesl says that she's hated words and she's loved them, but she hopes that she's always used them correctly. Life in an authoritarian political world is something that has been repeated through the cycle of history over and over again and is always a threat. And whether or not one should choose to rebel or remain neutral when they find themselves in a subversive political climate. Race and religion are also elements that come up. And also grief. This is something that not many children's books or young adult books address, though it is something many young adults and adolescents go through. The last line of the book shows how important the exploration of human universal themes is to the novel. Death ends with saying, "I am haunted by humans." This book would work wonderfully in the classroom. It's entertaining, but also weighty. The emotional attachment you form to the well-drawn characters means that readers stay engaged throughout and don't dread doing the assigned reading. This works well for upper level high school readers, especially the 10th grade and onward. Even though it is written in fairly simplistic language, younger readers may struggle with some of the dark themes. The book is perfect for teachers to really emphasize the historical context. You can show documentaries or assign research projects where the students look at any number of aspects of life in Nazi Germany. The book also pairs wonderfully and can be read alongside or in conversation with other canonical classic pieces of literature. Some of these include Elie Wiesel's Night, which is a memoir chronicling the tale of a Jewish young man who is actually sent to a concentration camp and his experiences surviving it. This would show the real threat of what Max is trying to avoid. Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl would also be interesting because of the comparison of two equally feisty young female characters, or in the case of Anne Frank, a real person who lived through this time period. Also, issues of censorship and authoritarian politics have not gone away and continue to be relevant in the world. This means that there's a lot of room to compare the past with current events or even predicting the future. Overall, The Book Thief is on its way to being a classic, part of young adult literature. From its heavy subject matter, its beautiful writing structure, it seems to truly be a timeless tale of love, grief, and the horrors of living in a time period and a place that seems beyond your control.